They survived blizzards, raids, and famine with meals costing almost nothing, yet feeding entire villages for days. From ash-baked breads to bone-only soups, these 15 cheap recipes kept people alive for centuries. And the last one? It's so strange you'll wonder how anyone dared to eat it. Let's start with 15. Leftovers mashed, fried, and reborn as tomorrow's breakfast. In many 19th century native villages, winter survival meant stretching calories like a drumskin. Archaeologists studying Navajo and Apache hearth sites have found scorched stone griddles with layers of carbonized food residue, some built up over decades. Proof that yesterday's dinner was tomorrow's breakfast. These mash cakes began with whatever survived the night: boiled beans, shredded venison, roasted pumpkin, cracked corn, even scraps of dried chokecherry paste. Women mashed it all by hand, sometimes mixing in a pinch of blue cornmeal or ground sunflower seeds for binding. The patty went into a cast iron skillet or directly on a hot flat rock, sizzling in rendered animal fat. Fat that could yield over 9 calories per gram, crucial in a time when the average adult burned 3,000 to 3,500 calories daily in winter. Elders claimed the flavors improved overnight, a natural fermentation that softened grains and deepened meat flavors. Much like modern stews taste better on day 2. In lean years, these cakes were a lifeline. Oral histories tell of families in the 1880s surviving a blizzard week on nothing but reheated mash cakes and pine needle tea. From here, though, we step back to the brutal moment before cooking, when meat itself was locked in winter's fist, and the only way forward was with force. Next is 14, the meat dish that needed a club before a fire. On the northern plains in January, fresh kill didn't stay fresh. It became frozen solid within hours. By morning, a deer hindquarter could weigh 30 pounds and feel like a slab of stone. Oral accounts from Lakota and Cree hunters describe hauling an elk so rigid they had to break the legs at the joints with a tomahawk just to fit them near the fire. Marrow was the hidden prize. Anthropologists have documented that marrow from elk bones contains up to 84% fat by weight, making it one of the most energy-dense wild foods available. Breaking femurs with clubs wasn't just to get smaller cuts. It was to access this liquid gold before it spoiled. In some cases, meat was deliberately frozen, then smashed into chips to be dried and stored as wasna or pemmican, lasting over a year without refrigeration. One Blackfeet winter cache unearthed in Montana held over 200 pounds of such preserved meat, enough to feed 15 people for a month. And yet, even these heavy-hitting meat stores couldn't match the staying power of one simple, nearly indestructible grain. Let's move on to 13. Corn ground into a powder that could survive a flood. In the Southwest, Hopi and Zuni families stored nixtamalized blue cornmeal in clay jars sealed with mud. This process, boiling kernels with wood ash or lime, unlocked niacin, preventing pellagra, and hardened the grain for decades-long storage. Archaeologists have excavated Puebloan granaries with cornmeal still intact after over 600 years underground. This wasn't just food, it was currency, wedding dowry, and ceremonial offering. In drought years, a single jar could mean survival. Corn powder was mixed with water into a tole, a porridge delivering over 350 calories per cup. Even after a flood, if the storage jar held, the meal inside stayed edible. The fine powder repelled moisture far better than whole kernels. But when water wasn't the enemy, cold was, and survival sometimes meant digging into the frozen ground for something sweet hidden in the roots. Next is 12. Roots boiled until they turned as sweet as candy. Plains tribes like the Mandan and Hidatsa dug prairie turnips, Soralea esculenta, each summer, slicing and drying them for winter. In the dead of January, these tough discs were boiled for hours, their starch breaking down into natural sugars. By weight, they could reach 15% sugar content, rivaling modern sweet potatoes. Dried turnip slices lasted over a year in rawhide sacks. Some families sweetened them with chokecherry syrup, creating a rare winter treat children waited months for. Anthropologists recorded elders recalling the smell filling an earth lodge as the roots softened, a sensory reminder that spring was still far away. And yet, for true winter staying power, nothing beat a soup that got better and thicker. the more days it simmered. Let's move on to 11, bean soup that grew stronger. The more you reheated it, in winter lodges of the Lakota, Ojibwe, and Mandan, the cooking fire rarely went out. A single kettle hung over the embers for weeks at a time, never emptied, only added to. Pinto beans, kidney beans, and wild legumes simmered alongside dried venison, corn, and root vegetables. Each night, the soup thickened as starch and protein leached into the broth. In the morning, fresh water, beans, or meat scraps went in. Over days, the flavor deepened. Elders claim the best taste came after 5 days of continuous cooking. It wasn't just convenience. This method preserved food by keeping it above bacterial growth temperature, an ingenious early form of slow cooking preservation. The record from fur trader Alexander Henry in 1801 describes dipping his ladle into a bean stew of 10 days making, its surface shimmering with fat that sealed in flavor like a lid. From here, preservation turned aquatic, quite literally, as we step into a food pulled from swamp waters. Next is 10, rice pulled from a swamp that could keep for an entire year. Manuman, or wild rice, Zizania palustris, was a cornerstone for Ojibwe and Menominee survival. Harvested each fall from canoes, the rice was knocked gently into boats with cedar sticks, leaving half the grains to recede. After drying over low fires, the husks were hand-threshed by treading. Yes, people danced barefoot on it inside bark-lined pits. Properly stored in birch bark makkuks boxes, wild rice could last over 12 months without spoiling. Each cup delivered about 160 calories and 6.5 grams of protein, far higher than most grains in Europe at the time. In deep winter, a pot of wild rice, cranberries, and venison could feed a family of 5 for pennies in trade value. Yet the nutritional worth was beyond calculation. The next survival dish took foraging to an even humbler place, tricking your stomach with seeds from the grass under your feet. Let's move on to 9, grass seed porridge, that fooled your stomach into thinking you were full. In the dry plains of the Great Basin, tribes like the Paiute and Shoshone turned to Indian rice grass, Echinacea heminoides. A single acre could yield up to 250 pounds of seed, but harvesting it was painstaking. Women scraped the seed heads into baskets with curved willow combs, often walking miles in the sun. The seeds were winnowed, parched, then stone ground into a fine, nutty flour. Mixed with hot water, it swelled into a thick porridge. The trick? While it delivered modest calories around about 350 per cup, the high fiber made you feel full for hours. John C. Fremont's 1844 expedition noted that Paiute guides lived on nothing but grass, meal, and hot water for days, still managing to outpace his well-fed men. Hunger was tricked, but survival was real. The next food was even stranger. A vegetable so preserved, it looked like cured animal hide. Next is 8, pumpkin so dried out, it looked like leather. Among the Hidatsa and Mandan, summer pumpkin harvests were sliced into 1/2-inch strips, then draped over willow racks in the open air. Within days, the bright orange flesh shriveled into leathery bands, losing over 80% of its weight, but concentrating sugars. Stored in parfleche bags, dried pumpkin could last over 18 months. Rehydrated in stews, it released a sweet, earthy flavor, a vital source of beta-carotene and calories during January blizzards. George Catlin, visiting in 1832, described women braiding the strips into ropes as long as a man for easy transport. They were light, stackable, and worth more in trade than fresh squash. From here, preservation shifted from gardens to rivers and to fish so smoked it looked like lumps of black stone. Let's move on to 7, the bone broth that started with cracking skulls. In winter-starved villages, nothing went to waste, not even hollow bones. Plains tribes like the Lakota would split bison femurs with stone mauls, prying out marrow rich in fat and vitamins A, D, E, and K. These bones, now jagged and open, were simmered for up to 48 hours in hide-lined pits with hot stones dropped in to keep the water near boiling. By the end, the broth was cloudy, thick with dissolved collagen, and carried over 150 calories per cup. Archaeologists have found bison bones near ancient hearths with pot polish, a sheen from constant stirring. This broth could revive the weak, feed toddlers, and keep elders alive through snowstorms that lasted weeks. Some broth was even boiled down into a jelly-like paste that hardened in the cold. Survival condensed into a block. But on the riverbanks, another preservation trick was taking fish far beyond fresh. Next is 6. Fish smoked until it looked like a piece of coal. On the northwest coast, salmon wasn't just food, it was currency. Haida and Tlingit fishermen caught Chinook and sockeye during summer runs, each fish weighing up to 40 pounds. The flesh was filleted, brined in seawater, then suspended over alderwood fires for up to 3 weeks. The goal wasn't flavor alone, it was shelf life. Fully smoked salmon lost over 2/3 of its water content, turning almost black and rock hard. Stored in bentwood cedar boxes, it could last 2 years without spoiling. Captain George Vancouver in 1793 recorded being offered blackened slabs of fish, sharp with smoke, yet sweet with oil, as trade payment. From here, the trail leads to gardens again, but not for soft vegetables. Instead, it was for a seed that could fool hunger itself. Now we're at 5. Bread you had to dig out of the ashes before it burned to nothing. On the Great Plains and in the Southwest, wheat wasn't common. Cornmeal was the bread base. Navajo and Pueblo women would mix blue cornmeal with ash water, not plain water, because the alkaline ash released niacin and boosted the protein digestibility by nearly 30%. The dough was flattened into discs no bigger than a man's palm, then slid directly into hot campfire ash. Without pans or stones, the bread cooked in under 5 minutes, but left too long, it became charcoal. The trick was to smell for the faint, nutty aroma before digging it out with a stick. Spanish chroniclers in the 1600s noted this ash bread could be made in bulk and carried for days without molding. Each disc held around 150 calories and was dense enough to survive a week's travel in a pouch. And while bread was quick survival, the next meal was a marathon. Next is 4. The acorn, coffee that tasted like mud, but saved lives. California tribes like the Miwok and Pomo didn't waste energy on imported coffee beans. Instead, they turned to acorns, high in fat and carbs but bitter with tannins. To make them drinkable, the nuts were cracked, leached in cold water for days, then roasted over coals until they darkened like coffee beans. Ground and boiled, the result was a smoky, earthy liquid, not pleasant, but loaded with over 200 calories per cup if you drank the slurry. In lean winters, it provided both hydration and slow-release energy. Early 20th century anthropologists recorded elders saying acorn coffee kept the hands warm and the belly from eating itself. From bitter drink, we moved to a dish boiled so long it transformed into something far stranger than it began. Now we reach 3. Corn boiled so long, it turned into something you couldn't chew wrong. Among the Cherokee, Choctaw, and Pueblo, a pot of corn could simmer for 12 to 24 hours without ever being taken off the fire. This wasn't wasteful, it was science. The process, called nixtamalization, used wood ash lye to break down the hull, boost calcium content, and release more B vitamins. A single cup could contain double the niacin of untreated corn, preventing deadly pellagra during hard winters. The corn, often cracked or left whole, swelled into soft, fragrant kernels that could be swallowed even with bad teeth. A lifesaver for elders. Spanish records from the 1540s note that some villages kept these pots going all week, adding fresh corn and water daily. Travelers were welcome to dip in for a ladle, and just when corn was your warm salvation, another bitter, strange drink was waiting to trick your hunger. Next is 2. The jerky that could outlive the person who made it. On the Great Plains, bison jerky wasn't just dried meat. It was time travel in food form. Hunters cut the meat into strips no thicker than a finger, hung it on willow racks, and let the sun and wind work for 3 to 5 days. If winter threatened or insects swarmed, smoke from cottonwood fires kept it safe. A pound of jerky, weighing only 20% of the original meat, held over 1,000 calories and could last 5 years if kept dry. Some families passed down emergency meat to children who hadn't even been born when it was made. Lewis and Clark's journals mention trading for old jerky still perfectly edible. But before jerky was the hero food, there was a dish where the meat wasn't even meat, and it came out of the ground. Let's move to one. They called it stone soup. But yes, real stones were in it. In lean times, villages across the plains and Southwest made a pot of stone soup, not as a joke, but as survival engineering. River-worn granite or basalt stones, heated in a fire until glowing red, were dropped into a skin bag or clay pot of water and scraps. The hot stones boiled the liquid without cracking the container, a method used when wood was scarce. The recipe varied: slivers of wild onion, handfuls of amaranth leaves, bone fragments still clinging to marrow, and whatever roots could be dug that day. The stones leached trace minerals like calcium and magnesium into the broth. Archaeologists in Nebraska have found cracked cooking stones dated to over 800 years old, still bearing carbon scorch marks. Villagers often passed certain stones down for generations. Talismans of hard winters survived. Survival cooking isn't just history, it's a genius we've almost forgotten. Click the next video on your screen to discover more hidden food secrets. And remember, only the curious get the full story. Don't miss what's coming next.